Exposing a surveillance program operating all around the Bay Area. Federal agents planting microphones to secretly record conversations. KPIX5's Jackie Ward is at the Oakland courthouse. Now, Jackie, can they legally do that?
Yes, they can, which may surprise a lot of you out there. Just imagine standing at that very bus stop, having a conversation with your friend and having no idea that your conversation was being recorded. It happens all the time, and the FBI says that they don't even need a warrant to do it.
They plant microphones under rocks, they plant microphones in trees, they plant microphones in equipment. I mean, there's microphones that are planted in places that people don't think about because that's the intent.
FBI agents hid microphones inside these light fixtures and at this bus stop without a warrant to record conversations between March 2010 and January 2011. The feds are trying to prove real estate investors in San Mateo and Alameda counties are guilty of bid rigging and fraud.
Family values and school districts. He says he's going to withhold funding if schools do not follow the policy. Well, in Texas, he can keep his 30 pieces of silver.
Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said Friday that the state is prepared to forfeit billions of federal dollars in public school funding in defiance of an Obama administration directive requiring schools to allow transgender students to use bathrooms and locker rooms consistent with their chosen gender identity.
New at noon, President Barack Obama is recommending that every school in the country should allow transgender students to use the bathrooms that match their current identity. Night on your sides, Tamika Artist is getting reaction for us this afternoon. Tamika.
Good afternoon. That's right. The Obama administration will issue those guidelines later on today, again, allowing transgender students to use the bathroom or locker room of their choice. Now, the president's executive order is coming just as this debate is heating up all across the country, from North Carolina to California. The president's decree is not legally binding, but the president feels the issue falls under Title IX.
I'm James Vallis. The Obama administration plans to issue a letter to all public school districts in the United States to instruct them to allow transgender students to use restrooms that match their gender identity, according to the New York Times. The newspaper reported late on Thursday that the letter will go out on Friday, telling school districts what to do to ensure that none of their students are discriminated against. The letter is signed by officials from both the Justice Department and the Department of Education. Although the letter does not have the force of law, it does contain an implicit threat to public schools that ignore the government's instructions. Those schools would risk lawsuits and a loss of federal aid, according to the report.
The change expected from the White House this morning about transgender rights in the bathrooms of the nation's public schools. ABC's Pierre Thomas is following the story for us in Washington this morning. And Pierre, what is the administration expected to tell the nation's schools?
Robin, good morning. The administration will issue a letter warning public schools across the country that they should not discriminate against transgender children, that they should be allowed to go to the restroom and locker room of the gender they identify with. This sets the stage for a legal, political, and perhaps cultural debate, with some civil rights leaders saying that the rights of transgender people must be respected and protected, and with critics claiming that the Obama administration is strong-arming local communities and that issues like this should be left to the states.
And how does the administration enforce this? Is this simply recommendation, or are there penalties?
These guidelines do not have the force of law and are simply recommendations, but there is a looming threat that the administration could seek to strip federal funding from states that don't comply. Robin, an intense debate is coming.
The quake struck at a depth of 15 kilometers just east of the coastal city of Yilan. It was felt as far as 60 kilometers away in the city of Taipei. Buildings shook violently for about half a minute. Two aftershocks measuring magnitude 4.4 struck just minutes later. There were no immediate reports of damage.
A 22-year-old Israeli soldier has become Israel's first transgender officer. He chose not to reveal his name, but instead asked to go by Sachar, which means dawn in Hebrew. Sachar's parents say that he identified as a male since he was 2 years old, when he asked to have his hair shaved off. When he was 4, he asked to stop wearing dresses. Sachar always knew he had a future in the military, where his mother and father were both officers. The Israeli army suspended its version of the don't ask, don't tell policy in the late 1990s and has accepted openly gay recruits ever since. According to the CEO of the Israeli National LGBT Task Force Rights Group, Israel's armed forces are considered one of the most accepting when it comes to gender identity.
It's been nearly a year since the Secretary of Defense declared the military's ban on transgender soldiers, quote, outdated. But the Pentagon has yet to issue any new directives despite deadlines. William Brangham explores what it means to be transgender in the armed forces.
In 2014, Lieutenant Blake Dreeman was going to be one of the first women to serve on a U.S. Navy submarine.
We got invited to the White House, and this is me with the President and all the first 24 females on the submarine.
But by the time that vessel launched in late 2013, Blake was physically transitioning to the male gender and giving himself weekly hormone injections.
I did my first shot the week before we got underway, and I took him underway with us.
Blake is a transgender man. His sex at birth was female, but he's long identified himself as male.
I probably knew when I was like 5, right, that something was amiss. But, you know, you grew up in the church, you grew up in Bible college, that type of environment, and you just learn to ignore it.
Blake is now stationed at the Pentagon. He says most of the other officers treat him like any other colleague.
The senior officers have been very receptive about it. I mean, I've talked to all kinds of them for sometimes an hour or an hour and a half at a time, just kind of answering questions. And, you know, if you ask, I'm very open.
The tide has slowly been turning for transgender service members like Blake. Until last year, if a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine changed their gender identity, Pentagon policy was to give them a medical disqualification and discharge them from service. This was policy, but it wasn't always strictly enforced. But last July, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter stopped these dismissals and ordered the Pentagon to draft plans to allow transgender people to serve openly.
Good evening. We begin tonight with team coverage of the storms that rocked parts of the mid-state in southern Kentucky. We've found some of the worst flooding damage in Portland. And then in Graves County, Kentucky, a little farther to the north and west, confirmation now, an EF2 tornado ripped through the area. And in Trousdale County, flooding and water rescues after heavy rain hit there. We begin tonight in Sumner County. Our Shannon Royster has more on how crews were called in for more than a dozen water rescues. Shannon?
Somewhere around 3:15, we started getting calls of flash flooding and people trapped in homes.
2 of those rescued were babies. Thankfully, they made it safely into the arms of a loved one.
The big problem is that we've had reports of over 7 inches of rain up in the Portland area.
Floodwater has swelled rivers, made roads impassable, and shut down businesses.
This is generally where we build our cabinets, but today we're going to take a day or 2 off, looks like.
Jerry Brown builds cabinets for a living.
Had to get everything up off the floor and try to salvage what we can.
And this isn't the first time he's had to do this.
We've been living here for 40 years, and we've always had the problem. It's just keeps getting worse.
Unfortunately, he'll just have to wait it out again. That's exactly what authorities recommend when it comes to flooding.
If they can shelter in place, we're asking them to shelter in place, just stay there. Don't take any chances on getting out and just let the water go down.
Vicki, what we know right now is about 10 families are displaced, and you can hear it and you can see it. The cleanup effort behind me has been going on now all day long. This is what remains of a used car dealership. This storm not only reshaped this neighborhood, but the attitudes of those who live here.
You don't really ever know what it's like till it does happen to you, you know, and then you don't forget it.
This is a day Marty Winfrey will never be able to erase from his mind.
That strip back over there is where I've seen all the debris flying.
That debris was from an EF2 tornado barreling its way towards Marty's home. No time to think, nowhere to hide.
I was running down that road and I thought, I'm not going to make it, you know, it's going to catch me because it was coming across here fast.
He found the closest and strongest thing he could hold on to.
Oh yeah, I was hugging it for life, but I was scared.
A tree directly in the path of the storm.
All of a sudden it turned and just shot over that way.
That way was his home. The tornado picked it up like a toy, tossing it and everything else across the street.